let's face it, there's at least one journalist who has an unhealthy obsession with our club, and you're not really going to win buying into the back and forth with people like that.
They suck us in every year, the Bulldogs, because those names are there.
You've been trying to sack him for 3 years now.
That's the reason why, because they're absolutely stacked.
G'day footy fans, and welcome to AFL Inside. On this episode, we will continue our exposé series and take a detailed look at media bias and how the rise of opinionated personalities has cast an ominous shadow over journalistic objectivity. Today, we'll be focusing on Kane Cornes, a former player who has fingerprints all over the footy media landscape, with roles on Channel 9's Footy Classified and Sunday Footy Show, the AFL website's The Round So Far segment, as well as a prominent role on SEN's Talkback radio program. I wanted to put a spotlight on Cornes' reporting of two very similar coach-related situations, and the starkness in contrast that Cornes displays when giving his opinion on the subject at hand. Let's dive in. The coaching journeys of Port Adelaide's Ken Hinkley and the Western Bulldogs' Luke Beveridge started out remarkably similar. Both men would take command during a tumultuous period at the football clubs involved. They would prove to be instrumental figures in turning around the fortunes of their struggling teams. Inspired choices from their respective selection committees. The rise from irrelevance to prominence was swift, with the Power falling agonisingly short of a grand final berth in Hinkley's second season in charge, whilst Beveridge would inspire his young squad to go all the way during his sophomore campaign. Both teams had become darlings of the competition by playing a daring brand of football led by a young core. However, the success would be fleeting, as both sides failed to make the finals in years 3 and 4, and then were knocked out in an elimination final in year 5. Here we can see just how similar the first 5 seasons for these coaches were, with the only difference being that Beveridge secured a premiership in 2016. This is where our similarities end. In seasons 6 and 7 at the helm, Ken Hinkley would once again miss the finals in both years. This was the 4th time in 5 years that the Power had failed to qualify, whilst they hadn't tasted victory in September since the semi-final week of 2014. Hinkley came out of contract at the end of 2020, and this is where our analysis of Kane Cornes' reporting begins. Here is our first glimpse of Cornes' thoughts on Ken Hinkley's future at Port Adelaide.
It's time to lock in Ken Hinkley. There's some talk about the contract clause with Hinkley. He must play finals for his contract to be extended to 2021. Well, that's off now. You can't go into 2021 with uncertainty about a coach and running through a process to hire a new coach. So come out now and lock in Ken Hinkley. And
this is actually very well measured, with some solid reasoning. Cornes gives his endorsement of Hinkley despite the lack of success over a 7-year. Here's where things take an interesting turn, as Cornes seems to almost gloat about Port's final round 2-point victory over the Dogs. The win secures Port a top 2 position and home ground advantage for at least their first 2 finals, whilst simultaneously knocking the Dogs out of the top 4.
Because the Dogs have dug a hole for themselves they can't seem to get out of.
Well, they've cost themselves a premiership, TJ. That's as plain as I can put it. It's one of the greatest chokes of all time that we've ever seen, and here's why. So after round 20, they are on top of the ladder. They lose 3 games in a row to Essendon, to Hawthorn, where they kick 5 goals, and to Port Adelaide. So that's bad enough. They're 3 goals up with 12 minutes to go for a top 4 spot on Friday night. They allow Port Adelaide to kick the final 3 goals of the game, including this one from Robbie Gray. And there goes your premiership. They are so hard to win. They fought. They were a lot of people's favourites for 20 weeks of the year, and they end up in 5th spot with no hope of winning the flag.
What needs to be highlighted here is the lack of context and detail that is attached to Cornes' opinion. He says that he will explain why it is an all-time choke job, but only mentions that the Dogs were on top of the ladder before losing their last 3 games. That's some deep analysis there, Kane. It was interesting that Cornes failed to mention that the Dogs lost Josh Bruce to an ACL in the round 21 clash with Essendon. With Bruce in the side, the Dogs had gone 15-4, had the competition's number 1 offence at 95.2 points per game, the league's healthiest percentage at 142%, and were on top of the ladder after round 20. In the fortnight after Josh's injury, the Doggies would average 50 points per game. After losing just 4 games for the entirety of the season, the Dogs lose their final 3 games and their offensive productivity is cut in half. It doesn't take any sort of genius to see that the Dogs had found a winning formula, and when the main weapon, who was second in the Coleman medal race, was removed from that formula, they struggled to adjust and were momentarily unable to cover his absence. And here's the thing, it is so much easier just to be hyperbolic, to sensationalise things and throw out grandiose statements like, "And there goes your premiership." And that's what Cornes has done here. He's taken the easy route. It seriously took me 5 minutes to research why the Dogs lost their offensive power at the end of the 2021 home and away season. So instead of the more balanced and measured response that Cornes took when speaking about Ken Hinkley, we end up with this lazy and bombastic take that frankly makes him look silly.
It's building on him, Hutchie, Luke Beveridge, because he wanted his preferred home, as you saw in Adelaide. There's going to be more Essendon supporters in Tassie than the Western Bulldogs, you would think. It is bubbling to a point that he is under the most pressure of any figure heading into these finals. There's his record. So, 7th season as coach. In only 1 of the 6 previous seasons, he has won a final, and of course that was 2016 when they went 4-0. That has distorted his coaching record in finals. No one will take that away from him, of course. That's in history forever. But to be on top of the ladder after round 20, finish outside the top 4, not play where you want to play on your home final, and that record in finals, he's under a significant amount of pressure this week.
Not content with labelling the Bulldogs as chokers, Cornes decides to up the ante and fires a shot at coach Luke Beveridge. At this point, I was trying to find an answer as to why Cornes would decide to put Beveridge in the hot seat. Every theory I had that would defend these comments would have been pure speculation, and any journalist worth his salt should never deal in the speculative world. What I will delve into is whether Cornes' comments around Beveridge were justified, and I'll do this by taking a look at his coaching contemporaries and their respective resumes heading into the 2021 finals series. Chris Scott and John Longmire both started their coaching journeys in 2011, and within 2 years, both would be premiership coaches. The Swans lost grand finals in 2014 and 2016, whilst the Cats had lost the 2020 decider. Both teams' fan bases were becoming restless at their coaches' inability to turn consistently strong sides into premiership-winning football clubs once more. Both Simon Goodwin and Chris Fagan began coaching in 2017, and both had failed to go past a preliminary final. Recent history had shown that their contemporaries in Clarkson, Scott, Longmire, Simpson and Beveridge had all won premierships within their first handful of seasons. With both men into season 5 of their tenures, the clock was now ticking. Leon Cameron had arguably the most talented team throughout the 2010s, but had failed to convert that into a premiership, and his team was absolutely humiliated, scoring just the 25 points in the 2019 grand final. And then we have Ken, who after nearly a decade in charge, had still yet to navigate his team into a grand final. Only 2 coaches had won a premiership since Beveridge achieved the ultimate back in 2016, Damien Hardwick and Adam Simpson. And both men's teams had failed to qualify for the finals, leaving Beveridge as our most recent premiership coach left, competing for the 2021 flag. So with this in mind, was Beveridge really the guy on the hot seat? Was there more pressure on him than the two coaches in Season 5 who had never been to a grand final? You could probably argue either way. Was he in the hot seat any more than Longmire, who also hadn't made a grand final since 2016, nor won one since 2012? Or Chris Scott, who hadn't won a flag since 2011? Probably not. Was he under more pressure than Leon Cameron, who hadn't won a premiership in more seasons at the helm? Or Ken Hinkley, who hadn't made a grand final in almost a decade in charge? Most definitely not. This was another example of Cornes valuing sensationalism over substance. On the back of his least productive game of 2021, Cornes highlights some footage of Treloar and what he perceives as a lack of effort during a tense finals win against the Lions. Cornes even goes so far as to say that Treloar had spat the dummy. Let's look at these so-called incidents in isolation. I'm not sure getting fended off by one of the strongest players in the league, a guy nicknamed the Specimen in Marcus Adams, and then attempting to smother his kick is lacking in effort. But let's move forward. Next, we see Treloar try and intercept a hand pass, but he gets his timing slightly wrong, and the subsequent half attempt at a smother admittedly looks exactly what it was, a half-hearted attempt. But again, there isn't too much wrong here. I've seen Treloar pull off this type of intercept many times before for 3 different teams and turn it into a lethal attacking foray. He was certainly trying to create something for his team. This next clip is ridiculous. I've witnessed every player from every team at some stage lay a clumsy tackle. Treloar's intent is to negate McCluggage physically. If he had spat the dummy or given up, he wouldn't even want to lay a tackle in the first place. Here, we see Cornes call out Treloar for not demanding the handball receive. And again, for someone who has played the game at the highest level, it is a perplexing take by Cornes. For starters, we can't see the full view down the ground and where Treloar would have been kicking to. If he saw a Brisbane Lions outnumber or Harris Andrews roaming free, then he's well within his rights not to call for the ball. What we can see is that had he called for the handball, there were 3 Lions players ready to close down the space and his run and carry. And then we see Hunter himself hesitant to kick the ball down the line. I'm happy to concede that this next clip does not look great. Treloar drops his head in frustration when the play is just out of his reach. But haven't we all had those moments as sports people? Just as you know when you're in the zone and everything you do turns to gold, you are also acutely aware when you are having one of those nights where absolutely nothing goes right. And Treloar was having one of those dirty, dirty nights. The last clip is just ludicrous. The hardest kick in football is to snap back across your body whilst moving away from the target. In this case, Treloar is not only under opposition pressure, but he's also on his opposite side. Cornes labels this as an inability to finish. If someone can find some footage of Kane kicking a goal from this exact situation and send it through, it would be greatly appreciated. Something tells me I'll be waiting a while. I mean, Chris Judd would struggle to finish from there, but these are the levels Cornes stoops to in order to attempt to strengthen his position. Out of the 6 pieces of evidence Cornes puts on display, you could argue that 1.5 acts looked a bit ordinary. The rest were all normal football actions that occurred dozens of times across all games every single week. Now, was Treloar's output down on his normal productivity? Absolutely. Are there reasons why? Undoubtedly. Did Kane even think to ask why, without making assumptions and drawing his own conclusions based on misleading snippets of footage? I think the answer on that is clear, but we'll revisit this a bit later on. It's amazing how sometimes karma takes the long way around. Other times, it can be amazingly swift. A look at the difference between Cornes' face just a few weeks earlier, after the Dogs had, in his words, cost themselves a premiership, and in this clip, after the Dogs had actually cost the Power a premiership, really says all you need to know about this man's impartiality. Minus Josh Bruce, Alex Keith and Cody Waitman, the Dogs made Port look second-rate in front of their home crowd and stormed into a second grand final in Beveridge's 7th year, whilst Hinkley would go into season 10 still without one. The Dogs had gone from Melbourne to Tassie to strict hotel isolation in Brisbane to Perth to Adelaide, where the South Australian government refused to let them train, and they still destroyed the Power, who had been at home the whole time. Cornes begrudgingly admits that nothing short of a grand final berth in 2022 would save Ken Hinkley's job. We'll bookmark that for later on.
That 10-year barrier, if you haven't won a premiership, is about the time. And when you start 0-2, when you have a performance like they did in the prelim, Caro, and then when you lose by 10 goals to a side that most of us thought were bottom 4 this year and the way they lost. What I'm saying is, though, leading into the season, there was a groundswell from the supporters. And you only have to go online to talkback radio, to the pressure, to the letters to the CEO of the footy club. There is a groundswell against him. And at Port Adelaide, it is a little bit different. Once you lose the supporters, and I saw it with Mark Williams in 2010, I certainly saw it with Matthew Primus in 2011, 2012, they won't turn up. And
he's not at that stage, though, is he?
Not at all. And this is what I'm saying.
But you're saying the supporters are off him?
I'm saying the supporters are off him. I think that is a real challenging situation for the leadership of the Port Adelaide Football Club, and they need to be really strong in supporting him, because he would know that.
Why are they off him, Kane?
It's been 10 years, Lauder. I think the dysfunction of the forward line is an issue. I think the way that they have lost against better sides, they lost to West Coast, Brisbane, Geelong, Melbourne last year in the prelim final, so their record against the top end hasn't been great.
In this clip, Cornes provides some genuinely good inside knowledge into the workings of Port Adelaide, and once again calls for some calm amidst the growing chaos, imploring leadership to be strong in their support of Hinkley. Without the hyperbole and sensationalism, it's amazing how insightful and measured Cornes can actually be.
10 years he's been there, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, we've spoken about it a lot, and you actually feel really sorry for coaches when they get to this stage and they're under so much pressure, and once the fans start to turn on you, it becomes really difficult. But they just need strong leadership. There's nothing to gain for any fan who says sack Ken Hinkley. In the end, they've kicked 14 goals, 13. You could break it down as simply as that. The inaccuracy has cost them. Now, is that Ken Hinkley's fault on the night? I would say probably not. But yeah, it's always going to be tough. 10 years without a premiership's hard, but strong leadership. If you sack him now, who's going to take the job for a start? And what's there to gain by it? He's contracted until the end of next year. Back him in, support him. And
I'll tell you what, Kane, I don't think you'd be saying the same things if it was any other club.
I would say, what's to gain by sacking a coach at round 5?
Well, I reckon if we went back through the archives, my friend, we'd be finding plenty of... I mean, I think you almost ran David Teague out of a job single-handedly.
Not at round 5. And he wasn't contracted until the end of... he's still got 18 months left. So I'm not of the opinion that any coach deserves to be sacked after round 5. I don't reckon I've ever said that.
I love that TJ calls out his hypocrisy here. As you can probably guess by now, Kane does not keep this level of composure, nor does he call for the same support when the heat really gets applied to Luke Beveridge in 2023.
Incredibly disrespectful to the coach. This is a coach that came in when the club was a mess.
On its knees.
An absolute mess. So Keith Thomas, Ken Hinkley, David Koch deserve respect. He has been a really good, strong coach, a great character, and has turned the footy club around basically single-handedly with some help. He's played off in the last 2 prelim finals. To think that you would sack him and show him that disrespect at the end of round 5, I get a little bit fired up about it. And I think you need to allow him time to turn this around, and we saw signs of that in the second half yesterday.
So you still think
make
that
a decision
can under Ken?
I don't know if they can, and I don't really care if they can. But this guy deserves to be treated with some dignity and some respect, to at least allow him to try. If you had to ask me to answer that, I would say I think he moves on at the end of the year. But let's treat this guy with some respect.
It's clear from this video just how emotionally invested Cornes is in the fortunes of Ken Hinkley and the Port Adelaide Football Club. And it's emotion that needs to be kept out of this form of journalism. When you get paid to report on 18 different organisations, the consistency of your opinion is paramount. Objectivity becomes king. If the story becomes so personal that your bias reveals itself to be blatantly obvious, then your opinion loses its validity. The very moment you have double standards, your credibility goes out the window. And this is unfortunately the very space that Kane Cornes occupies.
First of all, on Ken Hinkley, where are you on this? Collingwood didn't help on the weekend.
No, it didn't. Well,
Put your name to this. Like, you are a Port Adelaide great. You dance around this every week.
No, I don't.
Do you want him to coach your team next year?
I think that decision comes at the end of the year.
No, don't give me the general.
You can't do it now. You've got to put it into context.
You've got 3 weeks to go. They missed the finals.
What
the
has
end of the
happened? He
season
hasn't had a
now.
ruckman all year. He's had 15 surgeries at the club. They started 0-5. They have not once given up on the season. They've lost, I think, 9 games by under 12 points.
So you want him to coach?
You've got to. Yeah, I would be not upset if he coached next year.
Not what I asked you. Do you want him to coach the team next year?
I need to make that decision when I have the full facts in front of me at the end of the year.
I can't believe you skirted each other.
15 weeks later, and more of the same from Cornes. Remember after the prelim, when he said that Hinkley would need to make a grand final to survive? Even after the Power failed to make the finals in Hinkley's 10th season, Cornes could still not bring himself to say that Ken was not the right man for the job.
What is there still to see?
No, well, I need it. Who else is out there? Like, if Clarkson is there, if Ross Lyon... No, if it's Ken Hinkley versus Adam Kingley, it's Ken Hinkley.
What about what Craig McRae did, though? A fresh voice in there.
I understand that, and that may be beneficial for them. And I actually like the list. I love what I've seen from some of their young players. But I understand that, Hutchie. But that doesn't give you the full context. Their percentage is really healthy, and the group love him.
Interesting comment about Adam Kingsley that would come back to bite him. But we'll cover that a bit later. I love this next clip because it illustrates the difference between an actual journalist with sound reasoning and objectivity in Sam Edmund and Cornes, who is now clearly pushing an agenda.
Then that's good for the club. What is good for the coach is good for the club. So, I mean, Ken Hinkley's about to go into the last year of his contract with all sorts of scrutiny, media pressure, questions, not just for him, but questions for Tom Jonas, the leadership group, every player as the year goes on, if they... hit a few rocky spots.
To use your example, though, it's better for Ken Hinkley to have a contract extension now, but it's not better for the club.
Well, it could be better for the club, though. Well, they're different. They're very different. They're very different people with very different resumes at very different clubs. I mean, if we just look at Luke Beveridge initially, so he's won a premiership. He's taken them to another grand final. He's played, of his 8 seasons at the Dogs, he's taken them to finals in 6 of them. He is the most successful coach the club has ever had. I would say be careful what you wish for. He's a proven entity. To get rid of him or not to re-sign him and run the risk of someone poaching him, and I read a quote that he gave to Mark Robinson in the Herald Sun that a club had already reached out in the last couple of months that he said he swatted away. But who says that if he's unsigned in July that he's going to swat the next one away?
The grand final was a complete disaster. This season was a complete disaster. The final against Fremantle was a disaster. And when you look at the list that they have got, I don't know, has he underperformed? Should there be another premiership in that? It was a long time ago, 2016, and how long do you get? Like, how long does 2016 buy you to the point where they're now locked in for another 3 years of votes? This is the point. They want for nothing on the list. So, I mean,
they did want for things this year, but now going forward.
Well, everyone wants for something, but they had as good a group as anyone else in the competition.
I'm going to push back on 4 of the points Cornes brings up here. Firstly, he labels the Dogs' grand final loss as a disaster because of the blown out margin, and then doubles down by also calling out their elimination final loss to Freo 12 months later a disaster. So I'll ask this: if these performances were so disastrous, what then of the team who lost by 12 goals at home in the prelim to that disastrous team, and then started the next season off 0-5 and missed the finals altogether? What label do we put on that particular team and their coach? Catastrophic? Epic failures? What do you say to that, Kane? That's right, we need to treat them with respect and dignity. Secondly, we have the "they want for nothing" statement. This is a claim you will hear various times in many forms moving forward, and it's just not true. The Dogs lack severely in the small forward department. Cody Waitman kicked 34 goals last season, and their next best option was Riley West, who kicked 7. The Lions had Charlie Cameron, McCarthy and Rayner kick 110 between them. The Pies had Elliott and Bobby Hill, who kicked 72, and then they added another 30 plus with the addition of Lockie Schultz. Higgins and Butler, Bolton and Dusty, Papley and Haywood, Walters and Frederick, Green and Daniels, Pickett, Fritsch and Chandler, Ginnivan, Moore and Bruce. Almost every club in the comp has a more talented and more consistent small and medium forward setup than the Bulldogs. Next we have the "how long does 2016 buy you?" Again, you will hear Kane mention multiple times that 2016 was a long time ago. I have no qualms with Kane's questioning, but I reiterate that he must show consistency if he is going to choose that type of performance indicator to make judgments on a coach's worth. Again, how long does 2012 by John Longmire? How long did 2011 by Chris Scott? And most importantly, how long does 3 lost preliminary finals by Ken Hinkley? Either you apply the same reasoning across the board, or you don't use it in your argument. It's pretty basic stuff. Lastly, and most importantly, I want to address Cornes' claim that Beveridge had underperformed and offer up some much needed perspective. Beveridge has coached 9 full seasons from 2015 to 2023, and as we have established, already has made it to 2 grand finals and won a premiership in that time. There are 7 teams in that time period who have not made a grand final. Fremantle and the Gold Coast, who have also never won a premiership. Carlton, North Melbourne and St Kilda, who have also not won a premiership this century. And Essendon and Port Adelaide, who have also not won premierships for 20 years. There are 4 teams who have made grand finals and lost. The Swans, who have lost twice and haven't won a premiership in over a decade. The Giants, who have also never won a premiership. The Lions, who have also not won a premiership in over 20 years. And the Crows, who have also not won a premiership this century. Now there are 2 teams who have made 1 grand final and won the premiership. The Hawks at the end of their dynastic run, and the Demons, who saluted in 2021. There are 4 teams who have made 2 grand finals and won a premiership. The Pies, the Eagles, the Cats, and Luke Beveridge's Bulldogs. The only team with more than 2 grand finals and more than 1 premiership in that time period is Damien Hardwick's Tigers, who went 3 from 3. So on a ladder of performance in this time period, the only club, not coach, club, that has outperformed Beveridge is Richmond and Damien Hardwick. Unless Cornes has a measure for success outside of grand finals and premierships, the full magnitude of the sheer lunacy of this take is laid bare for all of us to see. So I pose this question to you, Kane. If Beveridge should lose his job for, in your words, underperforming, despite, as Edmund pointed out, being the greatest coach in Dogs history, making 2 grand finals and winning 1 premiership in just 9 years, should the Port Adelaide Football Club be demoted from the national competition for underperforming and making just the 2 grand finals and winning 1 premiership in their 27-year history? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
To call it bluntly, you blame the coach.
Yeah, I do, 100%. A coach's role is to maximise what you've got, be that individually with your players and to get the most out of your team. Now, he is failing to maximise the talent that he's got on the list individually and as a side, and this has been an issue for a long time.
What about the premiership and the grand final?
It's a long time ago. Like
a grand final was two years ago.
Here we see another example of Cornes pushing the narrative of what he perceives as Beveridge underachieving and failing to maximise the players he has at his disposal. When Lloyd pushes back and mentions the 2016 Premiership and 2021 Grand Final, Cornes pulls out the "that was a long time ago" line that we've already pulled apart. The panel then discussed the players who had left the Dogs since the 2016 Premiership, suggesting that disharmony was the cause. I decided to look back through Premiership teams from around that era, and again, it's just more lazy and inaccurate reporting. The 2015 Hawks had Mitchell, Hodge, Lewis, Birchall, Hill, Duray, Suckling, Shields and Isaac Smith all finished their careers in different jumpers. The Tigers lost Higgins, Butler, Ellis, Townsend, Soldo and Conker. The D's lost Luke Jackson straight after the Premiership, and then Harms and Jordan over the latest off-season, with Petty already rumoured to have 1 foot out the door. It's just modern footy. Even Kane's beloved Port Adelaide have lost Wingard, Impey, Polek, Pittard, Bonner, Amon, Trengove, Dougal Howard, Fantasia and Paddy Ryder from the 2016-17 era. To claim that the Dogs lose more players than any other team is a fallacy, and the allegation that the culture is somehow to blame is frankly irresponsible. Just a week later, and with Port off to another shaky start to the season, surprise, surprise, Kane backs Ken in yet again. No mention of underperforming or failing to maximise the assets at his disposal. Cornes doubles down on his comments from a year earlier, where he reiterates that there is no benefit to sacking a coach this early in a season. Remember after Port's prelim loss to the Dogs in 2021, when Cornes said Hinkley would need to make a grand final in 2022 to keep his job? Well, they missed the finals, and here we are in the early parts of 2023, and Cornes again says that Hinkley would need to make a grand final in 2023 to remain the head coach.
What then to survive this? Do you think he needs to play in a prelim? What do you think it would take for him to ever coach?
Well, it was always going to be hard. I sort of thought grand final, Lordo, because the prelim he'd been there. Different story for Luke Beveridge though, TJ. I think he needs to be under pressure, and as we've spoken about a number of times, he looked a little bit confused and lost and bemused almost on Friday night. It's like he's got this great shiny sports car that he just doesn't know what petrol to put in it. Like he's putting the wrong fuel in this car. He's got all Australians everywhere. He's got English.
Where'd
he's
you
got
pluck that one
Bontempelli.
from?
Well, it's a metaphor, TJ, because you look at it. He's got everything that he needs. Every list base is covered. Yeah, but he's putting diesel instead of high-powered fuel into it. Like what is going on?
I think he's at Carlton, mate.
And the decision to sign him before they needed to is an interesting one.
Has he got a backline? No, he doesn't have a backline.
As it stands at the moment, they're in the eight.
It's always, he doesn't have the key position players. Well, you get Jones, who's been extraordinary for them. You get Lobb. They've topped up with this group. He's got everything that he needs, but he can't come up with a formula and a defensive structure that can.
So are you
compete.
saying they should have have let him see out this season
There's
like Port Adelaide
no way
did.
they should have re-signed him when they did. I mean, would you re-sign him now?
Well, I said at the time, I felt that with 2 grand finals inside his 8 completed seasons of footy, and again, I'm not, don't get on with him,
but
so I felt it was the right decision to make.
If he was
I really
out of
did.
contract now, would you re-sign him now?
Again,
Or
I
would you
think
wait?
he's a good coach. He's made 2 grand finals in 8 seasons.
Yeah, but I think
they're hard to make.
Can you imagine if Sam Mitchell or Ross Lyon had this list, what they would produce?
A bit to unpack here. Putting aside the baffling car analogy Cornes uses, Kane makes the claim here that the Dogs have, and I quote, all Australians everywhere, and that every list base is covered. We've already debunked that claim, and I'm going to save the all Australian argument for a clip coming up shortly. What I really want to get into is the Sam Mitchell comment. Cornes, even as recently as after the Hawks slipped to 0-2 at the start of the 2024 season, described Sam Mitchell as a genius. He suggests here that Mitchell could do better than Beveridge with the Dogs list. Does Cornes not remember what Beveridge had at his disposal when he took over at the Dogs? Thankfully, the internet remembers, and they were in a worse place than what the Hawks are currently. In the Hawks' round 1 clash with Essendon, they had an average age of 25 years and 35 days. They had an average games played of 88.86 per player. 9 players had played under 50 games, whilst 8 had played over 100. He had 9 players that were aged 23 or under. When the Dogs won the flag in 2016, they had an average age of 24 years and 144 days. They had an average games played of 82.13 per player. 9 players had played under 50 games, whilst just 6 had played over 100. They had 13 players that were aged 23 or under. Yes, that's right, folks. The rebuilding team that Mitchell fielded against the Bombers and lost with in his 3rd season as head coach was older and more experienced than the team that Luke Beveridge coached to a premiership. Let that sink in for a second. After their first 2 seasons with sides that had similar demographics, Luke Beveridge had a win-loss record of 33-16 and had made the finals in both seasons, winning a flag. Mitchell's record at the same stage was 15-30, and he had had 2 bottom 6 finishes. So tell me, which one is the genius, Kane? This is what baffles me as to why Kane thinks Bevo has underperformed. If anything, he has overperformed. But we are getting closer and closer to Kane's agenda being revealed. So much for grand final or bust. Hinkley secures an extension on the basis of another strong home and away campaign. And even though the game plan standing up in September, when it actually matters, has always been the issue under Hinkley, Cornes couldn't be more pleased for his main man.
I think it's perfect. He deserves it. Yep. I think he would be happy with a 2-year contract, and he should be rewarded for that. And I think it gives you some certainty heading into the finals.
Remember back when Cornes' view was that Hinkley deserved to see out the 18 months left on his contract? Remember when he stated that Ken deserved to be treated with respect and dignity, and that any calls for him to be removed from his position were disrespectful? Like most of Kane's opinions, this logic seems to only apply to his beloved Ken Hinkley. You can see him almost salivating as David King lines up the question he's been itching for somebody to ask him. Let's roll the tape.
Make the call. Would you make the... Here we go. Here's a chance for you to really drive one home. If it was up to you and you had your hands on the purse strings at the Western Bulldogs, and you know that Hardwick's available, you know there's others available around the edges, whether it's Ken Hinkley or whether it's Adam Simpson or whether it's Damien Hart, whoever, or a younger option, would you exercise the option to explore other options in 2024?
I think it's time. Yeah, I do. I think he's been there too long. And once again, the coach's job is to maximise what you got. He doesn't do that and hasn't been able to do that for
7 years. Like, it's 7 years now. And last year's final series is another example of that. This group has been wasted, and it would be a real shame that they are an average football team with the list that they've got. So at the end of the year, not now, clearly, at the end of the year, I would be having serious conversations about moving on from Luke Beveridge as coach. I would.
They're a long, long way off the top three teams.
Miles. Their record against top 8 sides this year was 1-6 or something.
Cornes again uses the egregious statement that Beveridge has failed for the last 7 years, conveniently bypassing the grand final of just 2 years previous. I keep harping on this, but Ken Hinkley has been in his position for 2 years longer and has far less on his resume. But Cornes states that Beveridge has been there too long? There is no dignity here for the greatest coach in Footscray Western Bulldogs history. There is no respect. There is an agenda, and Cornes is hunting down his target just as he did as a tagger back in his playing days. I respect David King, but I was staggered at his take that the Dogs were miles off the top 3. And Cornes goes on to say that they are 1-6 or something against the top 8. The reality is, and always has been, that the margins between being a good side and being an elite side are razor thin. The Dogs lost to the eventual premiers in Collingwood by 12 points. They beat grand finalist Brisbane by 14 points. They beat 4th place Carlton by 20 points. They beat 3rd place GWS by 15 points in their first encounter and were 35 points up 8 minutes into the third quarter in their second match before they lost 2 key defenders in Keith and Bruce, whilst Liam Jones was already sidelined, and they lost by 5 points. The Doggies hold on in that game, and it's them who make the finals, and the Giants who miss out and don't get to go on to get within a point of Collingwood in the prelim. That's how tight this competition is. That's how minuscule the margin for error is. And King should know better.
Sure how much further evidence the Western Bulldogs board needs not to sit down and have some serious discussions about the coach at the end of the year. And I don't say that lightly, because I just think and feel they are wasting one of the great lists in the game. They got 3 of the top 5 AFL players in the league. That's Libba, that's English, that's Bontempelli. They got 2 key forwards in their absolute prime in Norton and Ugle-Hagan. They got 2 All-Australian running defenders in Dale and Daniel. They've got an excellent small forward. The list is there. You look at their record against top 8 sides, and they just can't beat anyone that is above them on the ladder, and they don't defend. This team does not defend, so they concede 7 goals from their back half again yesterday. So my feeling is, and it has been for a long time, as you know, on this program, it's not the first volcano that I've launched on Luke Beveridge and the Western Bulldogs. This is a wasted year, and they are wasting one of the AFL's great lists, and that comes down to coaching. If you are wasting the talent that you've got on the list, that comes down to coaching for me. And this has been a long time. Like 2016 is a long time ago. They can't finish top 4 ever in the home and away season. That's going to be the case again this year. And I just feel like with the list that they've got, that's not good enough.
Stevie, Nathan, do you subscribe to that?
I didn't see them as a contender coming into this season, so I don't think they've underperformed
not with
too
the
much.
list that they've got?
No, I don't think
backline's
they've got the same depth.
Backline's always been a concern.
They've got some superstars at the top,
They've
but
got superstars
underneath
everywhere.
that, no. Then they don't have anywhere near the amount of talent as Port Adelaide and Collingwood.
Oh my goodness, they've got so much more talent than both of those teams.
No,
Nathan?
disagree with that.
Alright, so it's time to talk about this great list that is absolutely stacked, that is full of all Australians and every other team would kill for. Stevie J does a great job of not buying into Kane's nonsense, and is finally someone that mentions that Port Adelaide have a better list, which Cornes scoffs at. So let's have a look at the actual data here. Since 2020, the Dogs have had 5 All-Australians. Bontempelli, McRae, Dale, Daniel and English. A decent amount, but hardly full of All-Australians. But surely it's more than Port Adelaide have had in the same period? Well, the Power had 3 All-Australians in 2023, with Houston, Rozee and Butters all being selected. 2021 saw Alir and Ollie Wines honoured, whilst in 2020 they had another trio in Boak, Darcy Byrne-Jones and Charlie Dixon. That's right folks, 8 All-Australians are currently on Port Adelaide's list. They have the most selections of any team over that 4-year period. More than recent premiers in Collingwood, who had 5 in that period, with Taylor Adams now gone, Geelong, who had 7, and Melbourne, who had 5. Cornes continues this pattern of misleading reporting to influence his audience, and honestly, it's quite disturbing. The lengths that he goes to would be comical if there wasn't somebody's livelihood and reputation at stake. Every single measure that he has used to persuade all and sundry that Luke Beveridge should lose his job has been weighted more heavily against Ken Hinkley, yet he continues to make excuses for Hinkley, preaching support and respect, whilst at the same time defaming and degrading Beveridge and the Bulldogs, who have achieved far more with far less, with a decade's worth of receipts to back it up.
And Kane, you've been calling for hard calls. You assessed this as a wrong extension at the time, back in December last year. You've now arrived at the position that you think change is needed.
Yeah, absolutely, Hutchie. Change is needed now. Otherwise, it'll get ugly towards the first start of next season. And
remember a few clips back when the Power couldn't make the finals in the last few weeks of 2022, and Kane said that he would need to wait until the end of the season, even though just 12 months earlier he had said that a grand final was the pass mark for the Power. Despite the overwhelming mountain of evidence, Cornes could never bring himself to say the words that Ken Hinkley should be moved on, and we are getting closer to finding out why that is the case. This is yet another example of Cornes' massive double standards at play. The whole video is more of the same regurgitated lies, but I did want to address the following comment.
You chuck in the numbers, Lordo, their inability to defend since 2016.
At this point, it's evidently clear that Cornes does not do any research and just makes things up as he goes. The metric that displays most clearly how well a team defends is the total amount of points that are kicked against them. In 2023, the Dogs ranked 5th for least points conceded. They were ranked better defensively than top 8 teams in the Lions, who made the grand final, the Giants, the Swans, and yep, you guessed it, the Power, who ranked 12th. Just 2 seasons before that, in 2021, the Dogs ranked 4th in this very same metric, just 58 points behind the first place Demons. So this team and this coach, who don't rate defense and have had an inability to defend since 2016, have rated in the top 5 teams for least points conceded in 2 of the past 3 seasons. Honestly, folks, you just couldn't make this stuff up. Cornes is lathered in desperation to nail his man, and it is quite clearly showing.
If it's Ken Hinkley versus Adam Kingsley, it's Ken Hinkley.
What about what Craig McRae did?
Ouch, this certainly didn't take very long to age poorly. Adam Kingsley, a Port Adelaide man, one of their own, in his first season as the Giants' leader, outcoaches Hinkley, who for the 4th finals campaign in a row, loses at home to end the Power's season. Let's hear Kane's thoughts.
But for me, it's a whole of club approach. I think it's too short-sighted just to focus on the senior coach.
Of course you do, Kane.
When I say an all of club approach, they went into the season with one defender above the height of 190 centimetres. One. They had no ruckman, or a ruckman that was clearly at the end of his career. They had one key forward who went into the final series banged up. I don't care who you are. Chris Scott, as we found out this year, if he had that list and that many issues in the list, they wouldn't have had success. That's why I think he's coached really well. That's why I would have extended him.
Almost like the 2021 prelim, when the Dogs had no Bruce, Keith and Waitman. Difference was they still managed to beat the Power by 12 goals and storm into a grand final. But here we have Cornes labelling Ken's straight sets exit as coaching really well. And as we've established, the Dogs' 2021 campaign under Luke Beveridge was apparently disastrous. The only thing disastrous here is Cornes' journalistic integrity.
It's ridiculous that an AFL senior coach, premiership winning coach, needed minding.
Well, and when minding might be the wrong word.
When have we ever not blamed a
Clarkson,
coach?
look,
Do you think Luke Beveridge is the problem?
Yes. Oh, how many times, Hutchie? All last year, it was a mistake to re-sign him, so they made their bed. They can line it.
New season, same old take. Remember when Cornes was categoric in his denial that he has ever called for a coach to be sacked at round 5? He's done it here after just one round. But that's enough. Let's go to the why.
The great man over here came into the club when I was probably on the way out, really. And the first thing he said was, we're going to extend your career and make sure you go out on the right way. And I couldn't thank you enough, because everything you've ever told me you've done exactly what you've always told me. And it sounds like a simple thing, but yeah, it's just, I just owe you so much, Kenny. You could have easily shown me the door and gone with the young boys, but still to this day, you give me the big jobs. You show so much faith in me, and the reason I'm leaving so happy and fulfilled and is because of you. So thanks, Kenny.
This clip gives you every answer as to why Kane Cornes could never even entertain the idea of going hard at Ken Hinkley. Ken supported Cornes when everyone else thought he was done for. Kane has continually returned the favour at every opportunity. One could even consider it a touching moment of unwavering loyalty. But just as loyalty to a player can cloud a coach's judgment, Cornes' loyalty to Hinkley has meant that all of his opinions are viewed through rose-coloured glasses, a liberty he does not afford others, like David Teague and like Luke Beveridge. So remember back at the end of 2021 when Cornes labelled the Dogs chokers and then doubled down and put the pressure hot seat on Luke Beveridge, and then followed it up by criticising Adam Treloar, accusing him of spitting the dummy? Well, this was Beveridge's response to that.
Well, Oliver, I said I was just interviewed by Channel 7 as I walked off the ground, and you guys do a really good job. You know, you provide positive pieces when they're warranted, and we all cop the constructive criticism when it happens. But some of that stuff was just nasty, you know, and there's probably 1, 2 or 3 people who, you know, if you're going to fail in life, like fail at something that is noble. You know, fail at something that you can dust yourself off and be proud that you had a go. If you're failing at trying to pull people apart and bring them down, like 2 or 3 journalists did this week, I don't know how people around you can live with you, how they can lie in bed with you, how they can look at themselves in the mirror. It's just nasty. You know, for a guy like Adam, people know that he's had some challenges over the journey. It was just really poor and vindictive stuff, you know, and it was really distasteful. So I'm just so happy for him tonight. You imagine the pressure he put himself under. And remember, I mean, people have got short memories, how outstanding he was for our football club in the early stanzas, in the early parts of the year, to give us solid grounding up near the top of the ladder. And he has an average game last week. And look, he didn't like it. Him and I had a really good chat about preparation this week. But what a great night for him, you know, to be able to withstand that and then give a great contribution for his teammates in our footy club. So I'm really proud of him and just bloody disappointed in a few people who are just really nasty.
Having lost Tom Boyd and Lin Jong to early retirements due to mental health, and knowing that players like Bailey Smith and Adam Treloar also struggle in this area. You can see why Beveridge was so disappointed in the commentary of so-called journalists such as Kane Cornes. We've already seen the clips of Treloar's apparent lack of trying, so we don't need to go there again. But I posed the question earlier, why did Treloar have such an unusually unproductive night? There are always reasons why the human beings who play our great sport can occasionally struggle and have an off night. Let's hear from Treloar himself.
In saying that as well, it's been an up and down year for myself personally with injury and obviously the COVID effect that's on in the world at the moment in Victoria, and not being able to have that flexibility to be able to go see Kim and Georgie up in Queensland as there's been some challenges, but
the emotion in Adam's voice says it all. COVID hit all of us hard. I couldn't imagine what it would have been like for someone who already had mental health and anxiety issues and had his partner and daughter living in another state. Now, one of two things has happened here. We know the Dogs were under strict hotel isolation when they travelled to Brisbane for the semi-final against the Lions. So either Treloar is finally in the same state as his daughter and partner and can't see them, which affects his performance, or he has been able to see them and the outpouring of emotion has affected his performance. Either way, all it takes is a phone call from the journalist to the club or Treloar himself to ask the logical question, to attain that much needed context that fills out the entirety of the picture being painted. Making assumptions and implying that Treloar was sooking it up due to not playing in the midfield is the kind of presumptuous commentary that impacts on a player's and therefore the club's well-being.
Do you think that some of that might have been directed at you because of your criticism of Adam Treloar?
Yeah, I was critical of Adam Treloar's body language and his performance last week, and I stand by it. I mean, I challenge anyone to go back and look at Adam Treloar's efforts last week. They were poor. It wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't call it out to the point where he almost gave up in some contests. I don't know if those comments were at me. I think it'd be much easier if Luke had the courage to actually name the people he was being critical of, and it would seem strange that he would bring, if it was me, my wife into those comments after a game. I'd find that incredibly strange, but
I interpreted that as being aimed mainly at you, Kane. Did you? And did you take it personally?
I don't know why it would be, Hutchie. I didn't get personal at all with Adam Treloar.
Well, let's go back and see whether you were personal, Kane.
No, I was really disappointed in his body language. It looks to me like a player that's, and you saw those numbers, 12 centre bounce appearances per game throughout the majority of the year and only 3 in the final series. He looks like he's spat the dummy a little bit because he's not playing midfield. And
you see, the thing is, Kane, when you get paid to use your words, it's imperative that you select those words wisely. When you use the words, and I quote, spat the dummy, the implication is that the player in question is acting like a baby, that's having a tantrum because he didn't get what he wants. In this case, midfield minutes. You can try and sugarcoat it any way you want, but the reality is that you insulted Adam Treloar, and in doing so, questioned his commitment to the team. In the space of a fortnight, you questioned Beveridge's team, you questioned the coach himself, and then you questioned one of his players. Bevo felt as though the last one crossed the line, and responded in kind, and questioned your ethics and your integrity. Instead of accepting responsibility, you've instead waged a 3-year vendetta to get him sacked, as pointed out by your own colleague in David King.
They suck us in every year, the Bulldogs, because those names are there.
You've been trying to sack him for 3 years now.
That's the reason why, because they're absolutely stacked.
There is no denial of your agenda, just as you didn't deny getting David Teague sacked. Only the timing of it.
I mean, I think you almost ran David Teague out of a job single-handedly.
Not at round 5.
This man is not a journalist. He is a shock jock, a mouthpiece who speaks first and thinks second. Thankfully, we are able to piece this all together and debunk his fraudulent takes one by one. Kane Cornes' extreme bias to the things he is emotionally invested in, be it protecting his former coach or trying to sack another who hurt his feelings, is irresponsible and damaging to the footy media industry and those who consume it. In short, we deserve better. I'll leave the final words to his premiership teammate, a guy who knows a thing or two about footy, 3-time premiership coach Damien Hardwick.
He doesn't generally believe that comment, but what he does is he says it to get clicks. That's how the media work. Surprise.
Now, this video ended up being much longer than I anticipated, but I figured that if you have an hour to sit through Footy Classified, then you have an hour to watch this sort of content. I was conscious of context, so I wanted to make sure that the clips shown weren't too heavily edited and gave a fuller picture of the entire story. Now, if you like this style of video, be sure to leave a comment. I've got a bit more up my sleeve and have my sights set squarely on the AFL itself. Thanks for watching AFL Insight. See you next time.